And Dave Sussman back with you at the Whiskey Politics Podcast. You can find our show at America's Voice News and YouTube. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button. And you can also find us on the Ricochet Audio Network and all of your favorite podcast applications of choice, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and many others. Well, we're here at the beautiful outside of Pacific Palisades, California, overlooking the ocean. So hopefully we're not going to get bitten too badly by the flies here. But I'm delighted to be sitting today with Tim Phillips. Tim Phillips with the Americans for Prosperity, correct?
Absolutely.
How are you today?
With you, David? I'm great. Always good to be in California.
Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
So I want to get into a couple of things regarding, first and foremost, Americans for Prosperity. Tell us a little bit about the backstory, what AFP does, and how you guys work around the country. Sure.
For many, many years, we looked at the opposition, and they had, with public employee unions and private sector unions and some of the more extreme environmental groups and community organizations, often taxpayer funded, they had a genuine grassroots infrastructure on the ground at the local, state, and level. They could put thousands of people at capitals. They could put flood neighborhoods with door knockers and phone calls. It was an effective way to drive their policy agenda and also impact the culture. And so about 14, 15 years ago, we launched Americans for Prosperity. To be more clear, Charles and David Koch launched Americans for Prosperity and also the foundation. And our goal was to build a similar grassroots organization that could help knock down barriers that hold people back from achieving their version of the American dream. Mm-hmm. And so we started as a small startup in 3 states, Kansas, North Carolina, and Texas. Did everything you can do in a startup wrong, as we tried to learn how to, genuinely build communities, recruit activists, become more effective at driving a policy agenda, impacting the culture. But we did grow as well, and today we're in 36 states with a permanent staff.
Wow.
And it's every region from New Hampshire to Arizona, from Alaska to Florida, and most states in between. It's what you would think of as some traditionally red states, Texas or Mississippi. Mm-hmm. We're in some traditionally blue states. You would think Illinois or New Jersey, and then a whole bunch of swing states as well. And we have over 3.3 million Americans, activists, who've taken action in some way with us over the last decade or so.
Gotcha. Now, as far as the impact that you have on elections, you're focused on national elections, state elections, local elections?
We do everything.
Okay.
We are focused on a handful of U.S. Senate races. So in Missouri, Josh Hawley, we think, is a policy champion we're supporting against Claire McCaskill. Governor Scott running in Florida for the U.S. Senate, the Nelson seat. Wisconsin, Montana, West Virginia, Tennessee. So a good chunk of U.S. Senate races, a significant number of House of Representative or congressional races across the country. So, for example, I was in Virginia 7, which is Dave Brack, I think Richmond, Virginia area. Good man, genuinely good on all the issues. He leads the way. We're active trying to help him. Will Hurd in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. We're active in that race. Emmer in Minnesota, Paulson in Minnesota. It's a wide number of races across the country. And then at the state level, we're in gubernatorial races. So Scott Walker is one of our top priorities. We spent, frankly, millions and millions of dollars. We think, in many ways, he's been the most consequential governor of his generation. If you think about the policies and the
unions.
The way he's genuinely impacted Wisconsin for the better over his almost 2 terms as governor. But also other gubernatorial races. Adam Laxalt, a young attorney general in Nevada who's running for governor. Good man. We're supporting him significantly. Our network is. Freedom Partners Action Front, Americans for Prosperity. Governor Ducey, wonderful business guy in Arizona. Ron DeSantis, one of the best members of the House of Representatives. He's from Florida, running for the open gubernatorial seat there. It's such an important race. But then also we're in dozens and dozens and dozens of state House, state Senate races across this country because people forget about the legislature at the state level. It's not kind of cool or high profile.
Right.
But you think about a lot of the policy victories of the last 10 years at the state level, they've come because there were good majorities at the state House and the state Senate level. So I know that's a long-winded answer, David, but it gives a sense of it. And I can tell you this, we're not an appendage of the Republican Party. We think it's important to genuinely be about long-term principles. And so we seek people who are genuinely right on most of the issues that are important to our network, but then also that lead and act in a way that frankly helps unite and bring people together to achieve things And that's what we look for in the campaigns and candidates we get behind.
As far as the candidates that you're working with, your focus is obviously getting them elected. How do you do that exactly? What are the approaches? It's funneling money, I assume.
No, we don't funnel money to them. We do TV ads. So like in Wisconsin, we've spent just over $9 million on the airwaves.
Okay.
So TV ads directly advocating the election or defeat of their opponents. We also have field offices.
So it's separate from the campaign then?
Completely separate from the campaign, yes. We don't coordinate. We're not allowed to, but we wouldn't even if we could.
Right.
It's totally separate from them. So, but in Wisconsin, we mentioned that we've done $9 million on the airwaves in television, radio, and digital.
Yeah.
And then we have 8 field offices across Wisconsin, permanent field offices, David. We're not popping them up for the election and trying to get it running. That's not very effective.
Right.
Many of these field offices we've had there for 8, 9, 10, 11 years. And by the way, they'll be there after the election. They'll be there next year working on policy and cultural or community efforts as well. So we do door knocking, phone calls to key voters, asking them to support the candidates we're supporting. We do a lot of phone banking, and then we do a lot of digital media work as well. Not just advertising, but working with our activists to get them and to urge them to post messages about these campaigns and candidates on their social media platforms, because you and I both know it matters so much more when somebody living in the Milwaukee suburbs or in Hudson, Wisconsin goes on their Facebook page, their Instagram page, their Twitter account, and talks about Scott Walker. That it matters more than if you do digital ads on those platforms.
Now, I know based upon the issues that you guys are fighting for, and I want to get into some of these issues with you, you're obviously primarily working for mostly conservative Republican candidates, correct?
It ends up being that for the most part. Yeah, there are no Democrats, for example, at the federal level that we're supporting. I will tell you though, I would hope that at some point there'll be some good Democrats on taxes and spending issues. There are some issues where we thanked Democrats for their support. So, for example, on criminal justice reform, we look at the recidivism rates among folks who are in prison who get out and end up being back in there. We look at incarceration rates. Something's wrong with our criminal justice system. We're seeking both state level and federal level changes. We've got some great Republicans pushing that. President Trump's one of them, by the way. He's been a real leader on that. Jared Kushner is the point person. But there are some good Democrats on that, and we've thanked them for their efforts. So we do thank them, but there haven't been yet any that have reached a level where you would say they're worth supporting.
I want to get into all of these issues, and we will right after this break. So we'll be right back. And we're back with Tim Phillips with Americans for Prosperity. So the issues that you guys are working on is really what interested me, and I think for our viewers as well, because I'm going to say most of our viewers are going to lean right of center, and they focus on tax reform, and they focus on obviously economic issues, national security, and the things. What are some of the top issues that you guys are focusing on right now for 2018 that you think will lend into 2020?
Yeah, the tax reform of 2017. We're still talking a lot about it to make sure Americans understand the virtue and the benefits they're receiving. It's one of the key reasons this economy is humming. That was a big issue for us. Deregulation or getting rid of regulations and red tape that erect barriers to opportunity. The Trump administration is doing great work there. Their appointments have been superb in that regard, both on the federal bench, but also in the different administrative regulatory agencies, whether it's at Energy or Interior or EPA, etc. In general, if it's a barrier to progress, if it's a barrier to Americans living the American dream and genuinely succeeding, we try to knock it down. That's one reason we're very active on criminal justice reform that I mentioned earlier. Another big issue for us are the occupational licensing barriers. I know you're familiar with those. These are mostly at the state and local level. It's where existing businesses lock in advantages by forcing people who want to go into the field, start new businesses, to go through hundreds of hours of training exercises, which are often nothing more than just extended
Give
costs.
us an example.
Hair braiding, cosmetology at the local level, a lot of times. Barbershops, that area, hair care, it's a pretty basic area. If you get a bad haircut or if you get a bad color, you're not going back. But you're also not going to be that negatively impacted by it. I mean, maybe the date on Saturday night won't be as good, but in general, it's not like it's life or death, right? I mean, you want your ophthalmologist to obviously have careful, clear licensing requirements. But when you're looking at some basic things like cosmetology or other things like that are more straightforward, more simple. Yet in many states, you have hundreds of hours of training required. which costs thousands and thousands of dollars. The licensing requirements are a barrier to entry for people being able to live their dreams out. And we've seen that across the country. So we have sought on a consistent basis to knock down those occupational licensing requirements, or at least simplify them and lessen the expense.
How do you do that? Because that is on a local level, correct?
Well, that's the virtue of our model. We have field offices at the local level,
right,
across these states that we're in.
But each are different. So Wisconsin's going to be different than Nevada than California.
Yeah. Our model is decentralized. So our state director in Tennessee has the ability, within the broader mission parameter that we set, to go after the issues where they think they can make the biggest difference in their state. So I mentioned Tennessee. Right now, Tennessee is preparing next year to be one of the leading criminal justice reform efforts in the country at the state level next year. And we're going to work with what we think will be a wonderful new governor there, who's going to be elected, we believe, in just less than 2 weeks in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And we think we're going to see the next big criminal justice reform move in the country. And it's interesting, David. Some folks will say, "Oh, well, that's kind of a soft on crime approach," but it's not at all. We want to see a civil society, and one important part of a civil society is the rule of law, right? But it's often counterintuitive as to what gets you that. Texas, a red state, took the lead about 6-8 years ago under Rick Perry, then the governor. They closed 3 state prisons via criminal justice reform, which, especially with nonviolent offenders, lessen sentences for nonviolent offenders. They were able to close 3 prisons. They've saved almost $3 billion cumulatively since then. And crime rates in Texas have actually gone down during that period of time.
What's the correlation between that?
I don't have an exact, it varies from state to state. In Texas, though, it's been significant drops in the overall crime rate, and not just nonviolent, which we're only dealing with nonviolent offenders, but across the board as well. And it's a two-pronged approach. It's not just lessening sentencing and having alternative sentencing approaches for nonviolent. It's also efforts while folks are in prison, at prison reform, to genuinely prepare them when they get out to be more productive. Because the thing about it, 99% of prisoners at the state and federal level are going to get out of jail at some point. So it's in our interest, beyond the humanity side of genuinely wanting to help fellow Americans to live a better life. It's also in our interest to make sure that they don't commit crimes and go back there.
Let's talk about the political aspect of that. I know that Trump has been focused on that. You've had the Kardashians in the White House, and Kanye West is talking about it. They released somebody directly due to, and I don't remember her name, but Kardashian. Kim, was it maybe?
Kim Kardashian.
Kim Kardashian. And so the political impact of that, all of a sudden you're starting to see the African-American vote increase in favor of this current president. Is this I want to say it's the right thing to do, but is it also a political thing to do?
I don't know. I tend to think, my mentor is Morton Blackwell, Leadership Institute, a great man. And I
went through Leadership Institute.
Yeah, oh, I did too. Well, he's my mentor, and he had a maxim that said, sound policy is sound politics. And I tend to go along with that. If it's a sound policy that genuinely helps improve people's lives, or at least eliminates barriers that gives them a shot at improving their lives, normally it's going to be good politics as well. Maybe not always in the short term, but certainly over the long term. So I suspect it'll have a political benefit because of that principle. But it's not. It's really not
the right thing to do.
It's just the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. I mean, very often the right thing to do is also the smart thing. Again, 99% of folks in prison today are going to be out one day. It behooves us to make sure that they have a mindset that is different when they get back out, so that they don't go back into a life of crime that harms innocent Americans, but also, frankly, lands them back in prison, where the cost of keeping them there is increasingly, increasing more and more at a time when spending and other issues at the budget level are stressing states.
I think it's really important for this discussion to occur on a more macro level than it currently is, because everything that you just said leads to, when do people get out of prison? People don't go to prison for life. They go for 2 years or 5 years or whatever it may be. It's very, very hard for those individuals to get employed afterwards, correct?
It is.
Even white-collar people, it's a blemish for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Okay?
We've actually, I know, and I'm not affiliated with Koch Industries, but Charles and David Koch have been leaders in supporting us.
Yeah.
They were one of the early companies to remove the question about, have you been convicted of a felony, on the initial employment form. And a lot of businesses are moving to that, which does get people in the door to have a shot, to be considered.
Do you have any idea of what type of percentage of businesses now have that on their application?
I don't. I know that it's a growing trend to move away from that question. I know it's a growing trend.
Yeah, yeah. Well, pretty soon you're not going to be able to ask what sex you are, you know?
Yeah, well. 36 states, 36. Yeah. Very much so. We want to make sure that we are actually in the communities where we have our field offices. So we do grassroots leadership training that trains activists, invest in them to make them more effective for the beliefs that they have, and hopefully also it bonds them, you know, more to Americans for Prosperity, more to the Libre Initiative, which works with Latinos, and more to Concerned Veterans for America, all organizations within our network at the grassroots level. So when I'm in Dade County, which I was there not long ago,
Florida,
we have 2 field offices. Yeah. It was basically Miami, Florida, enormous Latino population. And not just Cuban American. I mean, it's Venezuela American, El Salvadorian, and Haitian. I mean, everything. Yeah. And there we have bilingual staff operating out of those offices year round, year after year.
Wow.
Because the truth is, if we're going to reach people with our philosophy and with why our approach, freedom, individual liberty, is better, you got to be in there day in and day out.
This is a really, really big project you guys are running. I mean, what's your annual budget for something like this?
It's over $100 million a year. Huge. Is what Americans for Prosperity and the foundation spends. It's a significant effort. You know, infrastructure, it is expensive, right? I mean, you've got offices, you've got staff, but the truth is, the opposition has had this for decades, and for too long, our side relied too much on television and radio ads, and they would desperately, before a big issue battle or before a big election, they would scramble into a state and desperately try to put something together. Well, that's ineffective and inefficient. It's kind of like building an airplane as you try to roll down the runway. Maybe it gets off the ground, maybe it doesn't, but you know, it's not going to be the best way to be up in the air. So we've genuinely tried, and we have built a long-term grassroots infrastructure, and we've also tried to make sure that we invest in communities. So we do policy battles like the tax reform battle. You know, back last year we did several hundred town hall meetings in the 36 states that we're in supporting and urging tax reform to be passed. We did many of those with dozens of members of Congress. We did television ads, radio ads. So it was a full-scale, broader media and event blitz. But we used the over 100 field offices we have, and the hundreds of staff and the thousands and thousands of volunteers to also generate phone calls, emails, tweets and Facebook posts to the accounts of the House and Senate members, urging them as well. And we do this on the federal level, on the state level. States will do that for important issues in their state. And sometimes these issues are not necessarily covered the way a tax reform battle is, but they are very important. And I'll give you just one example. Veterans Administration reform. I know you're familiar with that. It happened in 2017. It's one of those rare occasions where it was genuinely bipartisan. You have some good Republicans joining some good Democrats in Congress, which is unheard of in many respects.
Focusing on the efficiencies.
Yeah.
Or inefficiencies.
Now the sad thing is, it took the literal death of a lot of our veterans waiting in lines and being lied to about how long they were waiting in lines for medical treatment. And it took abuses where Veterans Administration employees were lying, falsifying records, and still getting bonuses and promotions as they protected each other. Sadly, it took that, but our network drove an intense effort for several years to shine a light on Veterans Administration abuses. Back during the Obama years we shined a light, we couldn't get the legislation through. We kept working at it. It was about a 6-7 year battle. But last year we got dramatic VA reforms, and for the first time now, several hundred VA employees have been fired because they failed our veterans.
This is a relatively quick turnaround from you guys being involved with something like this, an issue like this, and actually seeing tangible results. What are some of the issues that you've worked on that have taken you much, much longer time and maybe even still working on? It's like just nickeling away at it.
Well, right to try legislation, it passed earlier this year. Right to try being if you have a terminal illness, it gives you a right to try experimental medicines.
Trump was just talking about this at one of his rallies this week.
Oh, okay, yeah, and so we have been pushing that for years at the state and federal level.
So explain real quickly what that is.
Well, basically, or not basically, it allows Americans with terminal illnesses to try to sign up and try experimental drugs or medicines and treatments or both to try to save or prolong their lives. I know that sounds like such a common sense thing. You think, well, who would be opposed to that? Well, a lot of the medical establishment was, some of the drug companies were, and frankly, some of the politicians just didn't want to work with each other. I mean, I know they just didn't, across party lines. And our network had been banging away on that for several years. At the state level, we passed some limited right to try, to the extent you can make a difference. It's mostly an FDA thing, so it's more of a federal thing. But we had done some state efforts with success. That finally broke through earlier this year. And President Trump, Ron Johnson, Wisconsin United States Senator, he really got it through in the Senate. He forced a voice vote on it before he would give his vote for a must-pass piece of legislation on another topic. And then once we had that, it was intense pressure in the House to get it done. And the president was a big part of it. He mentioned it in his State of the Union, which made a big difference, and he continued pushing it. So the president did a good job on that.
That is a long-term effort, and it's not just happening here in the United States. We had a gentleman by the name of Michael Crossland. Michael Crossland is an inspirational speaker. He's Australian. He was not expected to live as a baby. He had a terminal cancer, and they said, look, there's 25 people that are on this experimental drug. This is what they said to his mother. 24 of them died.
Yeah.
Somehow he didn't. So, but he was going to die anyway.
Right.
And they brought him home, and I just had an interview with him here in Malibu a few weeks ago.
That's an incredible story.
Right.
Okay, I've given you some successes. Let me tell you a few failures.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and I want to hear all about these as soon as
all about the failures, that's right.
And a lot more. I want to talk about regulation and some of the other issues that are happening right now. We'll be right back with Tim Phillips at American for Prosperity. And welcome back, Whiskey Politics, and I'm delighted to be sitting here at a beautiful day here at Pacific Palisades. Sorry about the flies. California, we don't get flies. I don't know. They all seem to be right here.
Come on, what's going on? They're swarming us.
I think we're next to somebody's something in the bush here. Maybe
we're showing immense self-discipline, though.
This is really hard.
If folks watching only knew the discipline it's taken, David, not to swat these things, but we're courageous. We're
all
in this
twitching.
Effort.
Everybody's wondering if we're going. Got a little bit of. Too much energy, too much Red Bull. But anyway, going back to what we were just talking about, you're talking about some of the successes. What are some of the challenges and weaknesses, and maybe even failures?
I think the biggest failure for us at the federal level has been the failure to rein in federal spending. We've spent 15 years on it, and we just haven't had success. We have struggled during Republican control, when they had control during the Bush years, failed miserably. In fact, they exploded earmarks through the roof. Remember the bridge to nowhere and all that? That was mostly Republican, sadly enough. Tom DeLay and others using federal largesse to keep power. Then the Democrats exploded spending when they had complete power early in the Obama years. When there was mixed control, remember late in the Obama years when Republicans held a chamber, the House, and Democrats held the Senate and the presidency, we had the sequestration, and for 2 years, discretionary spending was held in check. Now, the method by which it was achieved wasn't great, but nevertheless, it was important to do. That broke, and now we have the spectacle of spending back through the roof again. And people may have noticed that tax cuts took effect this year. Revenues to the government are up because we all know that when you lower tax rates, it stimulates activity, economic activity, and revenues are up to the government. But the deficit has exploded skyward this year because of overspending. The omnibus bill that the federal government, the House and the Senate passed and put on the president's desk in March, it blew through the budget caps and increased the deficit by about $600 billion, which is just horrible, David. So we have failed. It's been a frustrating frankly bitter time. I mean, it really has been, because with the deficit, it's one of those things where it's hard to dramatize it, because it lurks underneath everything.
We're about 22 trillion right now.
22 trillion, and plus all the interest on the debt that's piling up. Next year at the
and it's
rate
going to go up. Interest rates are raising.
The interest we're paying on the debt next year will most likely be more than we spend on defense next year. So that's been one of the.
So I want to talk about this because I come from a perspective of a fiscal conservative.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a free market guy. I'm an economist. That's my education, my background. I'm a small business advocate.
Yeah.
This has been my career for 28 years now. When I take a look at the Republicans and I take a look at the conservatives, their appeal to me as a free market conservative is that they want to hold back spending, as they did in the last couple of years of Obama's administration. We have a conservative in the White House. He's doing amazing things across the board on many different things, but as we just talked about, we are at 22 trillion Right. It doubled under Obama, but at this rate right now, what is going on? Who is holding back the reins?
Right now, both parties are abject failures. If you think bipartisanship is dead, just give them a bloated, out-of-control, pork-laden, cronyism-pushed bill, and they'll all jump to sign.
Well, the Freedom Caucus isn't enjoying any of this.
Mark Meadows and others have done have been gutsy about opposing it. Marsha Blackburn, so many others have fought hard. But the leadership on the Republican side in the House and the Senate, and the Democrat Party writ large, have both been, frankly, disasters on spending, because they don't have the will to do it. I also think that it's difficult to dramatize to the American public just how terrible this spending is for prosperity and freedom and our own good and well-being long-term. It's, you know, John Adams, he's had that one of those famous quotes from early on where he said, this experiment will succeed, I'm paraphrasing, only until Americans realize they can simply vote themselves as much largesse as they want. And that we do see that now. And we're working to try to find ways to rein this in. We know entitlement spending is the biggest driver, no question. Medicare, Medicaid, which is the fastest growing, by the way, Medicaid, and then Social Security. I will give credit to Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan had the Ryan budgets in 2011 and 12. They were the first budgets that actually reformed Medicare and Medicaid and made both programs solvent. It was a courageous budget. It passed the House 2 years in a row. And that was the best a chamber has done in this modern era, to actually try to come up with a genuine plan and then have the will to pass it through a chamber, which they did. But since then, we've had nothing.
Okay, so you just talked about entitlements being the biggest part of our spending, and many of those are fixed entitlements. You have Social Security, you have Medicare. Go back 12 years, I think it was, 2006, George Bush and Social Security.
Right.
That thing was DOA, fourth rail, can't touch it. Because why? Well, the second this election is over, and for those people that are watching, we're still a couple of weeks away from the election, but 2020 is going to be on November the 7th of 2018. And so we can't touch it because we've got to be reelected in 2020. And then it's going to be 2022. How do you reform spending when you're always, as a politician, always focused on the next election?
I will say this. Paul Ryan did those two budgets. Mitt Romney chose him to be on the ticket in 12. The Democrats launched sustained, aggressive assaults on the old Medicare stuff, the Social Security attacks, claiming the Romney-Ryan ticket was going to do that. The share of the vote that Romney-Ryan received among 65 and older Americans went up in 2012 from 2008. They did not lose that race because of 65 and older voters. In fact, their share of the vote went up from 2008. So we've pointed that out to a lot of politicians, and we've said it's possible to actually, you know, save the country fiscally, which is what we've got to do with. I mean, Medicare is going bankrupt. Everyone knows that. And within the next decade or so, to at least solve Medicare and Medicaid, which are two of the big three, and then still do well with 65 and older Americans. Americans, I do think there's a better understanding we have to do something. And we do point back to that 2012 example. And we do hope that President Trump changes his mind. He said no changes to entitlements. He said that during the campaign. But hopefully he'll relook at it, you know, and certainly at least at Medicare and Medicaid. Social Security is tougher. There's no question about that, to be able to figure out how to reform it in a way that keeps the government's promises and still has the confidence of so many Americans. But Medicare and Medicaid can be done. In fact,
who's going to take over Paul Ryan's role?
I don't know. I really don't know. Kevin McCarthy, if they hold the majority, Kevin McCarthy seems to have the inside track. Our network doesn't get involved in leadership battles, so I really don't know. That's not an area I'm going to really be able to help much on. Okay. So, you know, when you're taking a look at that, and again, it comes back to electoral and what is going to get me voted back in. We have a lack of will right now. And I think from a perspective of, I'm generally very happy with this president, okay, just as a voter. I'm very happy with much of what he's doing. He talked last week about coming in and cutting 5%, the nickel plan, through his cabinet.
government agencies.
That's a good proposal.
Okay, it's an outstanding proposal, right? But it comes back to the entitlements of what you were talking about. That's where the biggest expenses are.
In the end, but the discretionary side is important because it at least shows that this is an important priority, reining in spending.
Right.
Because if you begin showing that, like the president's saying, we're going to cut each agency by 5%, Americans then begin realizing, hopefully, hey, overspending is a big problem that's hurting my prosperity. It can genuinely damage not just my children and grandchildren's lives, but this generation as well. So it's a good thing beyond just the dollars that are being saved for Americans. It shows them, it shines a bright light on that problem. And you mentioned this president. I think one of the best things he's done as well are judges, and not just the Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, but all the two lower court levels on the federal side. And Mitch McConnell, he's done an incredible job of driving through these nominations to confirmation. You know the numbers, of course.
Yep.
This is the most federal judges confirmed in the first 2 years of an administration ever. That's, or at least in the modern era, that's incredible. They deserve a lot of credit.
Does that stop if the House turns?
No, it doesn't, because it's strictly a Senate play on that.
Yeah.
And to tell you how bad it was for the Democrats, they actually agreed to 15 more judges after the last Supreme Court battle, because they knew we don't want to go through that again.
They just went through last week, I think.
Yeah, they didn't want to do that again. And
Yeah.
One thing I hope, and we hope the Kavanaugh thing showed, is that you need to bring back some civility to the policy
And I want to
process.
talk about that real quick. Last question for you before we get to our break. We're talking about entitlements, Obamacare. What's going on with that with the Republicans right now?
The biggest disappointment, along with spending, the failure to rein in spending, was their failure to keep the promise to repeal Obamacare. They had promised that for 3 consecutive federal election cycles. They finally got the majority, they finally got the presidency, and they failed to deliver. And I thought the most damaging blow was, remember, they had promised on day 1 of the new Congress in January of 2017, they were going to repeal it in the House. If they had done that, we would have had the momentum, the energy behind that. We would have had a fighting chance in the Senate to get something done. When they failed to keep their promise there, and that's mostly on the House leadership for not even allowing a vote.
Why didn't they do that?
They had a loss of nerve. There's no other way to say it. There just isn't, David. I respect the leadership. I respect Paul Ryan. He's done many good things, but they had a loss of nerve, and they should have kept their word. And on day 1,
does that signify how deeply entangled this law was? How the tentacles just spread throughout the entire economy, and whoever unwound it may have precipitated a recession?
I think that sometimes when you are, it's like the old thing when the dog is chasing a car, what do you do when you catch it?
Right.
They had promised it so long with wonderful results politically. They had never thought about, okay, how are we going to do it and what's it going to look like? But shame on them. There's no excuse. Like I've heard lots of different excuses. Oh, we had to do it on a multi-step process, everything else. Sometimes the simplest thing, I know this is shocking in the political world, but sometimes the simplest thing is just to keep your word. You promised to repeal it. You didn't promise to tweak it or to nibble around the edges or to do a 9-month study and come up with a better plan. And
they had 7 years to study it.
Yes. And they had 7 years to actually prepare to do it. They had made the promise over and over and over. They had won both chambers, with that being the primary promise they had made. That was the primary promise they had made. And it was a loss of will. There's no other way around it. And it's something that so many Americans dislike about Congress anyway. Is they'll say something, they'll promise something, and then not do it. And that, it was the most devastating decision not to do it, or at least
it was very disappointing. And meanwhile, many people, especially who have individual plans, are opening up their 2019 premiums, and they're seeing them go up another $1,200
through the roof.
Yeah, it's insane. We'll be right back. We're going to talk a little bit more about this and what Tim was just talking about regarding civility or lack thereof. Right back here with Whiskey Politics. And welcome back, Whiskey Politics. I'm here with Tim Phillips with Americans for Prosperity, and we're doing okay. We're making it through the flies here. There's no big major earthquakes. We're not falling off the bluff here into the Pacific Ocean either. The film, this is being filmed today. It's a Wednesday. The news all day today, and people are going to be watching this down the road. They may have even forgotten about it because of the way our outrage machine works in the news today. But there were bombs being sent to all of the Democrats, high-level Democrats across the country today. We don't know who sent them. We don't know if it's a false flag. We don't know if it's just an unhinged conservative. But it really does point to some of the biggest issues that I think us as a country are facing right now, and that is our union or lack thereof. Talk to me about the politics of 2018 and moving forward right now. What are we looking at?
I can tell you that everyone bears responsibility, including us. We've looked at, as a network at Americans for Prosperity, we've gone back and looked at a lot of our rhetoric over the last 3 or 4, 5, 6 years. And frankly, we could do better at providing solutions rather than just going into disparagement and attack mode. But it's across the board, and it does debase the country. It's not just, oh, well, niceness is better, but you're not really solving problems. That's not true. You can solve problems in a civil manner. You can have disagreements in a civil manner. And I'll give you just one example. We disagree with President Trump on trade. We look at free trade and we realize it's not perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect free trade, but that freer trade raises prosperity for our country and for individual Americans. It lowers consumer prices. It helps American companies. The president disagrees, but it's been genuinely a civil disagreement. And we've explained why we think it's better to go our approach, and obviously he's done the same thing. But it's not just a matter of political niceties. It genuinely can debase the culture. And we're seeing that. The way a lot of senators and House members are being attacked when, these are usually Republicans, are being attacked when they're in restaurants. And now some of the stuff we're seeing today.
I think a lot of people will say, well, so-and-so started it, this side started it, or they can't accept an election that they lost in 2016. And I just came from Politicon last weekend.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 days of debates and panels, and it's the left and the right coming together.
Yeah.
Now, I go to CPAC, I go to Freedom Fest. Those are conservative-leaning events.
Right.
Okay, there's the Netroots on the left. They go to those different things. But Politicon was a combination of both. And I sat down, I actually wrote an article that went up on Ricochet today on this, about a conversation that I have with this black woman. She was sitting there at the end of the couch. She asked me if I supported Trump. I said, well, I support his policy. She says, well, I can't talk to you because you support a racist, you support a homophobe.
Yeah.
And I would have walked away, but I needed to charge my phone. So I sat there, and 45 minutes later, we were having a good contextual debate about the issues.
Right.
And why are we not doing that now?
I think so much of the tribalism is because we don't have, as a country, many shared platforms anymore. You've got such a segmentation of the news delivery system where
we're cocooned.
We're cocooned in many respects. Many writers now are writing about how even within the zip codes that Americans are moving into, they're self-selecting people who are just like them, and it's not always based on race. A lot of times it's based on economic levels.
There's dating services now for Trump or for the Democrat,
seen that,
right?
Yeah, I've seen those advertised on different networks, which is fascinating. And I think that, I know 25 years ago, and I was a newer, younger guy getting into this field, there was much more rubbing elbows with folks on the other side. You did it in neighborhoods, you did it in campaigns. There's much less of that now. And I do think that's one reason. I think social media, with the ever more competitive news cycle, it often rewards the more outrageous comment, the more aggressive, nasty attack. It rewards that. You get more likes or more retweets or more instances where you're getting a lot more attention. I think that's part of it. We've come back from the brink as a country before, where the situation was very tense and bordering on violent, which sadly in many cases
68.
it is now.
Yep.
68, I look back across, in the late 1800s, there was an intense time. The TR years with the monopoly busting and the Gilded Age, that was a time of intense battles. Heck, back when you read about the Jefferson and Adams wars, you realize that was an incredibly intense times when parties were first forming in this country. It's not a new problem for us. It just means that we should go back and look at what worked back then to bring our nation more closely together. And again, I think it's okay to have genuinely robust disagreements. That's not the issue. It's the manner in which we're going about it. And by the way, it's too simplistic to just blame President Trump, which some folks want to do. He's by the way, he's done his fair share to exacerbate. No question about that. No question about that. He's debased too often with his language. But to simply blame him is silly and wrong. The left has been crazy.
What is the medium for that now? Because if you turn on CNN and Fox News and whatever your political choice of media is, it's talking heads that when you actually boil it down, out of a 3 or 4 minute segment, there's 3 or 4 people up there, so they each get 20, 30 seconds to talk.
Right.
And they're screaming at each other, and I don't know about you, but I feel like it's cancerous.
Yeah. I don't know.
Where do we go?
I'm not sure what the answer is with regard to media cycles and with me. I'm not sure I have the answers there. I do know that as a network, we're determined to, and we already have in many respects, change the way we're communicating. We are genuinely working to still have issue disagreements. If you look at some of our ads this year in Missouri with regard to Claire McCaskill, a Democrat senator there, we do disagree with her. We take her to task. But if you look at those ads, we are genuinely trying to change the language and the tone and tenor of those ads. And so I think sometimes as physician, heal thyself, do what you can do, control what you can control, and what we can control as a network, as Americans for Prosperity and others, is the way we communicate. And then urge other Americans to do the same. I don't like the idea of government regulation on it. That's a recipe for heavy-handed government control, and it makes me nervous when anyone starts talking about, the First Amendment is too robust. The problem is not free speech. The problem is how people are perhaps using it. But I don't think the government should be intervening. We don't support that.
That's interesting. And my last point on this is that I think it also is going to be dependent upon the future generation. And you and I just walking over here, I was saying that we had your son Cabot on campus reform, right?
Yes, campus reform.
So you've got campus reform. You've got TP USA, Turning Point USA with Charlie Kirk, who I just met over the weekend again. Are you optimistic for that? Because we're seeing this huge, massive wave of conservatives coming out of the the Generation Z and the millennials now.
Yeah, we are hopeful. I know at the Charles G. Koch Foundation, they do a lot. That's not, I'm Americans for Prosperity, but the Charles Koch Foundation does a lot of work on higher education, on campuses, and in helping students, along with the other groups that you mentioned, understand that robust free speech is a principle of American civil society. And it makes us unique, by the way. Other countries, even free countries, don't have that in many respects. So we're genuinely concerned about the idea of students, and not just students, but it does seem more prevalent on campuses, of the First Amendment being eroded, and it's a frightening thing. And I do think it's good for what I see on these campuses. And the other thing, I mentioned this earlier, it's so important to learn how to disagree. Free speech and civility, it doesn't mean not standing on principle. Sometimes I'll talk to conservatives or even liberals, and they think that civility in the public arena somehow is weak. It somehow, David, means you're not standing on principle. That's not it at all. You can stand on principle genuinely for your values and the things you believe in, whether it's economic freedom or other things you may believe in. But you can do it in a civil way. It's not weakness. A lot of times, frankly, it takes more strength, more self-discipline to act with respect.
It's harder.
It is hard.
You have to use discipline. You have to use patience. Because you want to shake somebody and say, "Why aren't you getting it?" And facts over feelings.
That's why I tell a lot of fellow conservatives and liberals too, by the way. I tell them, look, it doesn't mean weakness. Respect and civility. It's not weak. It's strength. It's showing that I'm so confident in what I believe. And whether it's free trade or the virtue of criminal justice reform, I'm so confident in that I can actually act in a civil manner, explain my views because they're compelling, without resorting to ad hominem attacks and cutting snarky and
that's what we need. That's what we need to work on. And I'm guilty of that every once in a while. I go on Twitter and I say something just to get it off my chest. But no, it's about sitting down and sitting on the couch with that person that I was talking to at
and again, it's not weakness. It's strength.
No,
it
was hard work. I was exhausted after.
Yeah, you can win this way. In fact, I think in many respects, if we're going to enact what we believe in the policies and in the culture, frankly, we've got to find more civil ways to reach out and win people over.
Well, you've got so much going on at Americans for Prosperity, and that's AmericansForProsperity.org?
Yes, .org, yes.
O-R-G.
Absolutely.
Okay,
O-R-G.
so find Tim at Americans for Prosperity.
On Facebook as well, on Twitter.
Okay,
so.
and Twitter, Facebook, and everything else. And I'd love to have you back on and talk about what's going on, maybe post-election, and talk about what's going on for 2020 as well, because this thing just never ends.
Very much so.
Yeah. Tim Phillips, thank you so much for joining us, and
David,
appreciate you following us also. Again, you can follow us at America's Voice News. You can find it at americasvoicenews.com. Just look for the Whiskey Politics. You'll find all of our videos. YouTube, you can subscribe, and Ricochet Audio Network if you're listening to this, as well as all of the podcast applications. Again, very special thanks to Tim Phillips, AmericansForProsperity.org, and we'll be back again very soon at Whiskey Politics.